Hi, everyone, and welcome to Listening to Lancaster. I'm Diana Martin with Hourglass, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by Kate Austin, the Green Infrastructure Asset Coordinator for the City of Lancaster. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I also want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors for these episodes, WAP Electric, Landis Communities, and Martin Insurance. So thank you for your support. Kate, let's jump right into this topic. Green
Sure.
infrastructure is probably becoming a little bit more of a familiar term to people. For anyone who's not familiar, how do you kind of describe green infrastructure and why it's so important to the city of Lancaster?
Sure. Yeah. So green infrastructure, when we talk about it, we're talking about man-made constructed systems that are built to replicate what happens in nature, what happens in the natural processes. And so when we're talking about green stormwater infrastructure, we are designing systems that can help to manage stormwater runoff coming off of our roadways, our houses, our businesses, our sidewalks, all that good stuff, and infiltrating that water into an area. We might be infiltrating it into soils and helping to manage it with plants, if that might be a rain garden or even our street trees. Uh, we might also be looking at infiltrating water through porous pavements. We have a lot of that throughout the city, whether it's porous pavers in the parking bays along some of the sides of our roads, or even porous asphalt basketball courts throughout the city. We're also with using plantings in our rain gardens and other bioretention areas. We are, in addition to infiltrating the water into the soil, we're allowing it to evaporate and transpire and go through the process with the plants. So essentially, we're really kind of creating sort of a green sponge across the city to absorb as much of the water as we can in place, and direct it into our groundwater to replenish our groundwater supplies.
Mhm. And that's been really a priority for the city of Lancaster, largely because of our combined sewer system and some of the overflows that's causing into the Conestoga River. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why are we so kind of focused on green infrastructure? And I know we have a consent degree with the EPA, so could you give us a little background there?
Sure, sure. Yeah. Yeah, so Lancaster, we are at a really we're at a really critical place in terms of our geographic location. We're at a key point in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and so the water that leaves the city of Lancaster goes into the Conestoga River, and then that discharges into the Susquehanna River, which goes into the Chesapeake Bay. And so there is a regional goal to improve water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. And the way that we're approaching that in Pennsylvania is by improving water quality in our local rivers and streams. So here in Lancaster, we are focusing on how we can improve water quality in the Conestoga River and the Little Conestoga Creek. We discharge to both of those. And so the challenge that we have in the city of Lancaster, we have a combined sewer system. And what that means is when it rains, water falls onto either goes into our storm drains in the street. And when it goes into those storm drains, it enters into a combined sewer system in much of the city, especially the downtown portion of the city. And the combined sewer system means that the same pipes that carry our sewage from our homes and businesses, and our stormwater all combine into the same pipe. And in a typical rain event, everything goes to our advanced wastewater treatment plant, and gets treated before it discharges into the Conestoga River. And we are not alone in this setup. There's about 770 cities across the country that have combined sewer systems. And at the time, it was really thought of a more advanced way of managing all of the polluted runoff that occurs in urban areas. The issue is the system can only handle so much capacity. And so when we have rain events that exceed the amount of capacity that the system can handle, we have what are called combined sewer overflows. So there are overflow pipes in the system that discharge untreated stormwater and sewage directly into the Conestoga River. And so our goal in terms of improving water quality is to reduce those combined sewer overflow events. And so we are under what's called a consent decree, which is a legal agreement with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to have a strategy to reduce those combined sewer overflow events over the next the near future. So so green infrastructure plays a really key role in that by helping to absorb that water in place rather than sending it into the combined system.
How often are those overflow events happening into the Conestoga River, and what is the impact of a city of the size of Lancaster with kind of those overflow events?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have about 50 overflow events per year, and so it's we, especially with climate change, as we're seeing increased intensity of rain events, it is possible for us to have more of them. And and the impact that has is that we have this untreated stormwater and sewage that goes into our river. As you can imagine, at the same time, our rivers are also receiving runoff from other sources. So here in Lancaster County, we're really kind of a hot spot of pollution, not just from the city, but we also have, we're also really fortunate to have this amazing agricultural network here in the county. But one of the side effects of all of our wonderful farmland with our rich topsoil is that we have agricultural runoff that also is entering into our waterways. So, and as you can imagine, that is also happening during those storm events. And so the combination of the agricultural runoff, our other stormwater runoff from other suburban areas, and the runoff that is happening here in the city is detrimental to the health of the Conestoga River. So we are all working together, and our agricultural partners are working to install practices that will help to one, keep our topsoil on our farms where we need it, and to protect the quality of our waterways. And then here in the city, we are playing our part in installing green infrastructure installations and other gray infrastructure installations as well to improve water quality and protect the river from polluted runoff.
You just mentioned that there's the difference of the gray infrastructure and the green infrastructure. Lancaster City has really made a committed effort to address some of this through green infrastructure. What does that really mean? What are the options of kind of taking a gray infrastructure approach, and what are the costs and challenges associated with that versus if we invest more into green infrastructure?
Sure, yeah. We really look at green infrastructure as one of the tools in the toolbox for addressing our water quality needs. And gray infrastructure is also a really important part. And so with gray infrastructure, what we're talking about is sometimes increasing the size of pipes that carry the volume of water that is going to our wastewater treatment plant. We've already made significant improvements to our wastewater treatment plant, so it's known as an advanced wastewater treatment system. But in So in addition to, so the combination of these two systems, green infrastructure and gray infrastructure might also be large tanks, underground tanks that might be able to hold the water temporarily before it can go to the wastewater treatment system after the rain event. But the combination of these two is really critical because we can't meet our goals with just one strategy alone. Gray infrastructure tends to be very expensive, and the installation of the infrastructure is very disruptive to our urban fabric. So, as you might imagine, a city that is 300 years old, we have a lot of infrastructure beneath our streets. And so we don't always have opportunities to increase pipe size beneath our streets, or to install large storage tanks. We look at opportunities to do that where we might have it, but also it's a very expensive proposition, and pretty disruptive to everyday life, tearing up more streets in order to make these improvements. So green infrastructure, when we looked at the cost comparison when we were first looking at what direction we wanted to go and how we were going to manage our stormwater runoff challenges. We assessed the price of installation of green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. And looking at installation alone, green infrastructure comes in at about roughly half the cost of gray infrastructure for managing the same volume. Now, with that, green infrastructure, both green and gray infrastructure, require maintenance over time, and so those maintenance costs aren't worked into those numbers. But there is a cost savings in the installation of green infrastructure, as well as other additional benefits that come with green infrastructure, like community greening, reduced urban heat island effect, greater habitat in our community. And so there's some of these additional benefits that come with the green infrastructure. So by partnering gray and green together, we're able to really meet the challenge of reducing these combined sewer overflows.
Yeah, one of the surprising benefits to me of green infrastructure, I had the opportunity recently to go on a walking tour with you of the
Mm-hmm.
green infrastructure. And one of the surprising benefits to me was actually traffic calming measures, which is not really something I had thought about. But some of your projects where you're putting in rain gardens, bump outs to allow for some of that vegetation or trees actually works as a traffic calming measure to make the streets safer.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really fantastic how when we think holistically about how we can improve our the right of way, green infrastructure can be a really key piece of that. Obviously, we're getting our stormwater management benefit, but then in addition, we're able to narrow the traffic lanes, and that has the advantage of it tends to slow traffic, and so we've seen that at the installation at Pullman Walnut Streets by the Lancaster Brewing Company, where we put in some very large rain gardens. And we've also seen that benefit in the two-way street conversions at Mulberry and Charlotte Streets, as well as other installations around the city.
So the city has an official 25-year green infrastructure plan. I believe that was created back in 2011. So we're about halfway through that plan. What does that plan say, and where are we with that implementation?
Yeah, so when we first established the Green Infrastructure Plan in 2011, we were really seeking to install demonstration projects and see how this could work for the city of Lancaster. So we started off with about $10 million in funding that came from a number of sources. Some of that was Penvest, a low-cost loan for environmental projects that's available in the state. Some of it was grant funding, cobbling those sources together to be able to start implementing these types of projects. And so we were able to install a large number of projects. To date, we have installed about 74 projects throughout the city, and each of those projects includes a number of practices within them. And so we have, I believe we're at about 300 some individual practices throughout the city. And so we are managing somewhere close to about 50 million gallons annually of stormwater. And we have a goal we updated our green infrastructure plan back in 2018 with the Green at Lancaster plan. And we looking forward kind of where we were in 2018, where we wanted to move within this 25-year period, with a goal of managing about 80 million gallons. So we're well on our way to meeting that goal. And so these days we are typically installing about 4 major projects per year, 3 to 4 projects per year. And so we're just going to continue to grow.
You mentioned a couple of the projects that are, I think, very recognizable. The one right outside of Lancaster Brewing Company. What are some other projects that either people might recognize or have been some recent projects that you've been working on?
Sure. Yeah. So one of our early projects that we installed is at Brandon Park. In fact, early in our program, we really focused on installing green infrastructure in a lot of our city parks. One, these parks were due for renovation already, and so we were able to leverage the funds that we had for stormwater management with the capital funds for park improvements. But we also recognize that our parks are a great location with the opportunity to manage not just the impervious areas that are within the park, but also some of the surrounding areas. So some of the rooftops and roadways in the surrounding areas that all drain into that park. And so in Brandon Park, we have about 20 rain gardens, and there is a very large basketball court there. It's 4 full courts, and the entire thing is porous asphalt, and it manages a tremendous amount of water. And the other side benefit there is, one, the court is relatively dry as soon as it stops raining, so people can go out and play pretty much immediately afterwards. But the other side benefit that we didn't anticipate, and residents have been particularly happy with, is the porous asphalt. Because of the pore space within the asphalt mix, it tends to dampen the sound of the ball bouncing. So for basketball courts that are adjacent to residential neighborhoods, like at Sixth Ward Park and Crystal Park, it's a little bit quieter. And so that's been a real advantage, both for residents who live close to the park and for people playing basketball who might not be getting as many complaints. So yeah, but some recent projects that we've installed, on Highland Avenue, in the entryway to the city on the south end of town, we installed a number of these curbside vegetated bump outs to help slow traffic. This was an area that we identified that people were entering at a pretty high speed into a very residential block, and helping to slow traffic there and also to manage stormwater on the street. We also installed curb extensions on St. Joseph Street in the southwest, over by Lafayette Elementary School, and we had some localized flooding issues there that we've been able to really help to manage, and also adding some nice green space in the community there. And so we have more in the works. There is a subsurface infiltration project out on Landis Drive in the Conestoga Woods neighborhood in the annexed area of the city. And so it is pretty well, our projects are spread out all over the place. So yeah.
What does your kind of team look like now? I didn't even ask you, what do you do in your role as the green infrastructure asset coordinator? And I know, as you're building out all of these new projects, there's also a lot of green infrastructure that needs to be maintained. So I know that you have a team that's working with you in the city, and kind of what does that look like?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in our stormwater bureau, we have, I work with a water resources engineer, and our urban forester, Cody, who recently did an interview with you all, and as well as a green infrastructure asset technician who does monthly inspections of all of the green infrastructure installations in the city. So she's out in the field just checking on how things are functioning, and when there is maintenance needed, writing up work orders in our asset management system to go to our maintenance team. And on the maintenance side, we have 2, soon to be 3 staff on the green infrastructure maintenance team who are maintaining our bioretention areas and cleaning out any of the inlets that are associated with the green infrastructure practices. So they have special filters in them that need to be cleaned out on a monthly basis. And then in our streets department, we have staff who are sweeping our porous paver surfaces on a monthly basis to keep them clean and free of debris accumulating on them. That's a important maintenance function there to keep them infiltrating well into the future, is to keep them clean of leaves and other debris that can sometimes settle on the surface. And so we have a great team. I would say we probably could expand even further, especially as we build new projects. But yeah, and we collaborate really well together in keeping the lines of communication open so that we can assess how things are functioning, if we have a problem, how to address it, brainstorming solutions that we can address in-house. If there are issues that present themselves that we need to bring in an outside professional to update or to make changes to, we can do that. And then also, and one of the things that I think is most critical is taking those lessons that we learn out in the field in our inspections and our maintenance work and communicating that back to the design team, and so that we can make sure that we are constantly improving on the installations that we install, and taking those lessons learned and putting them into practice. And that has really helped to having that open communication from the maintenance to the inspections and monitoring to the design has really helped us to improve the installations throughout the city.
I think people would be surprised actually how much green infrastructure is around them all the time, that it's not even that noticeable. When I was walking with you and you were pointing out, this alley is actually porous pavement, or this parking lot, or these parking spaces. It's something that to the untrained eye, you might not even notice that's all around you. And to your point that the porous pavement, it doesn't work really well if it's covered up by a lot of things that rainwater is not soaking through. So that takes some vigilance. When I was able to walk with you on a walking tour of the city's green infrastructure, you were very transparent about there's a lot that we're still learning. Green infrastructure it's kind of an emerging technology. It's not a one size fits all solution. We've tried some things in the city that haven't been successful, and I'm curious if you could share some of what you're learning and how we're thinking about new projects moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right that this is a growing field, and this is a growing department for us here in the city. And there's a lot that we've learned from the time we started installing some of these practices back in 2011 until today. And so when I think about for instance, the installation at Pullman Walnut by the Lancaster Brewing Company, we installed that project, one of our early projects, managing a tremendous amount of stormwater. I think it manages about 1.5 million gallons annually, and we're very proud of it. It is the only Pennsylvania winner of the BUBBA Award, the Best Urban BMP in the Bay Award, and so we're very, very proud of it. And unfortunately, within our first year, all of our vegetation died, and so that was a really disappointing outcome. And we had to assess, all right, what's going on here? Why is our vegetation not surviving? We had planted a lot of shrubs that are native to Pennsylvania, and we had some grasses, but largely it was shrubs planted throughout. And we assessed kind of some of the surrounding situation and determined that we had two things at play here. One, our bioretention soils are very sand-based, so they're really intended to infiltrate water quickly, and so that means that they're not holding on to water for long periods of time. And so some of the plants that we had planted needed a little bit more nutrients and moisture than they were getting. But the bigger issue was that there is along Walnut Street, it's a major entry into the city, and we salt it heavily in the winter months. And so we ended up with getting a lot of salt into our rain garden areas. And these were plants that were not suited for salts. And so we worked with a landscape designer to come up with a new planting palette that with plant species that are suited for, they're more coastal species. So they can handle the salts, they can handle the sandy environment, and they're native to New Jersey and Delaware. So not too far away from us, but they really fit this local microclimate that we've created here. So those kind of lessons have really helped us in how we think about what the planting palette needs to look like for other installations as well. We also see that sediment accumulation in our rain gardens. If you walk along the side of the road and you see all of the, the little fine gravel that comes off of the roadway, that all washes into our rain gardens and can really cause a lot of problems. It can choke out the plants that we like and create a perfect environment for the weeds growing that we don't like. And so we have changed how the water enters our rain gardens by installing some of these, what we call concrete sediment forebays. Sort of goes against what we normally think about with rain gardens by installing more concrete in an area. But what it allows is for the sediment, that fine grit to kind of drop out within this concrete area. It's highly visible for our maintenance staff. They can get in with a flat edge shovel or a vacuum and clean that out really easily. And it doesn't get into the soils in the rain garden then. And so that has been a really important lesson learned. Another thing that we've learned is that we need to take into consideration not just the immediate area of our project, but also think about some of those adjacent surfaces around the area. We've had challenges sometimes with with a, say we installed the rain gardens at Pullman Walnut, and there was an adjacent alleyway that was a private alley. It was unimproved. It was mostly mud, and a lot of that was washing into our rain garden and causing issues for us. And so we worked with property owners to improve that alley and stabilize the surface. We put in some porous asphalt to help manage more stormwater and just keep everything stabilized. So those kind of lessons that we've learned in the field, and sometimes those fixes can be expensive, but they're really important, and it's really helped us progress and move forward in installing the best practices we can.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that we have to think about with green infrastructure is, there's all these great benefits to green infrastructure. One of them is even increasing property values. I think there's some data that supports that. The flip side of that, there's also the conversation about how some of these improvements could cause gentrification and have other kind of negative impacts on the community. So how are you thinking about that with the city of Lancaster?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and it's a really, gentrification and affordable housing in general are real challenges here in the city right now, and in many communities, but we're really seeing it in the city. And so it's a real concern that if we make these environmental improvements and community improvements through green infrastructure, is it going to cause a rise in housing costs? Is it going to expense people out of the neighborhood? And this is a very real concern. And but I also think about the fact that these are improvements that really help to improve the quality of life for all residents, and we all deserve these improvements in our community. And so and it can have some really immediate impacts for residents, helping to deal with that localized flooding in rain events, helping to manage water in the right of way that might have otherwise been getting into people's basements. And so in addition to increasing green space and just a more aesthetically beautiful environment for everyone to live in. And I strongly believe that all residents of the city deserve that, and so we need to think about what are the other tools that we can use, whether it's through our planning department or just other community design efforts to protect our residents and make sure that we can be making improvements and supporting all neighborhoods in the city, and so that everyone can take advantage of these great benefits.
Mhm. Um, have you found a sustainable funding source for this green infrastructure? Kind of how is that? What's the model for these projects moving forward?
Yeah. So we have in the city we all residents, all property owners pay a stormwater fee annually that is based on the amount of impervious area that is on the parcel. And so that generates enough revenue to largely cover our operating budget. Our operating budget is around $4.7 million a year, and that covers mostly our operations and maintenance, our staffing, and then and covers some of the cost of installing new projects. We also apply regularly for grant funding, and we budget about another $2 million annually that we're either borrowing or getting grant funding to support new capital projects for green infrastructure.
I imagine a lot of these green infrastructure projects, there's a lot of public-private partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea kind of what percent of these projects are done in public spaces like parks you mentioned, and then what is being done by private sector? You know, we've heard a lot about green roofs in Lancaster, or when I walked with you, we walked by a church that used their parking lot and turned it into porous pavement. So how does that kind of look in the city?
Absolutely. So yeah, we have a number of projects that have been fully public-private partnership projects. So like some of the church parking lot improvement, and some other local businesses, especially early in our green infrastructure program when we had that $10 million in funding that we were looking to install demonstration projects. We partnered with a lot of private businesses to really demonstrate how these projects can work, how they can function on both public and private properties. And since we updated our stormwater ordinance, we also now require anytime there is new impervious area being installed in the city. So that could be anything from putting a shed in the backyard up to constructing, a brand new building. There has to be some kind of stormwater management project that is installed. So basically anything that's over 100 square feet, there has to be some kind of a stormwater project. And most of the time that is some sort of green infrastructure project. So we see a lot of infiltration trenches installed, rain gardens, green roofs. We do see some capture projects like large cisterns that are installed underground that can be used for irrigation or other uses. And so that is all of our private projects that are going in. And so every land development project down to the smaller residential projects include these kinds of improvements. And so I don't have a number specifically of kind of what the breakdown is, but I do just want to say just how critically important that is. We really recognize in our green infrastructure plan that we cannot get to the combined sewer overflow reductions that we need to get to on public property alone. We can't do it all in the right of way. We can't do it on, in our parks and on our city properties. We need to be doing it everywhere. And so it's been really wonderful to see all of these really innovative, interesting projects installed all throughout the city. Everything from, a residential do-it-yourself project to a large land development project. And so it's really exciting to see.
What does the future hold for the city's green infrastructure program? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, we certainly plan to keep growing and installing more projects and practices, and we really plan to just continue to try to stay on the cutting edge of, especially for cities of our size. So when we adopted our green infrastructure plan back in 2011, we were the first third-class city in the state of Pennsylvania to adopt a green infrastructure plan, and we're still a model for other cities of our size across the country and even internationally. And so we really hope to continue to be a leader and to keep innovating and exploring and learning from the work that we're doing, and bringing these benefits to the community and engaging community members in the work that we're doing.
Have you seen any of this green infrastructure expand to other parts of the county? Are some of the smaller cities or towns around Lancaster also kind of looking to you or working with you on their own green infrastructure improvements?
Yeah, absolutely. We regularly do kind of knowledge shares and tours with other municipalities. A few years ago, some of our staff went to York, and we talked about some of the challenges that they were having with some of their rain gardens that were really similar to the challenges we were having. So we were able to brainstorm and talk about what we found, what works, what doesn't. We also often talk with other municipalities that are looking to institute a stormwater fee. And so I know that I believe West Hempfield Township currently is, I don't know if they have officially passed their fee, but they were looking into instituting a stormwater fee to cover the cost of water quality improvements in the township. And it's really exciting to see. And then we look to often Philadelphia's program. Pittsburgh is making some strides in water quality projects there. It's great to see examples of what they're doing. But also DC is doing incredible work. We look at a lot of the larger cities kind of for inspiration, and then see what we can bring to a city of 60,000 people.
Is there anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to share, or just ways people could learn more or get involved if they're interested in this topic?
Yeah. So you can always learn more by checking out our website. There's lots of great resources there. I definitely encourage people to check out the Green at Lancaster plan, as well as we have a green infrastructure design manual if you're interested in what do these projects look like and how are they constructed. There's some good resources there, as well as our operations and maintenance plan and our monitoring plan. And so and then we're also building currently a program for residents. We've had a lot of residents express interest in helping to support our green infrastructure installations by adopting them. And so we are building out an adopted green infrastructure program. So for anyone who's interested in helping to support your local green infrastructure installation, whether that's just picking trash out of it, when you have a chance, if you're more of a green thumb and you're interested in learning that plant palette, we can train you in what's growing in there, and you can assist with weeding if that's of interest. Any ways that we can support residents in engaging more in these really interesting practices and give you the tools so that you can help us help out our community in improving our water quality.
That's great. I didn't know about the adopted green infrastructure plan. If people are interested in that, is that something kind of coming in the pipeline?
Yeah, that's coming in the pipeline that we'll probably be looking at officially launching in the spring. And so if anyone's interested, reach out to me and I'd be happy to get you started. We already have a few volunteers over at Brightside Baptist Church who have already gotten started in taking care of the rain garden in front of the church there. And so it's great to see.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Kate. This is really fascinating to learn more about the City of Lancaster's green infrastructure program. For everyone who's listening, you can find more episodes of Listening to Lancaster, including the episode we just did with the city's urban forester, and a lot of street trees are also related to this issue of stormwater. You can find those on our YouTube channel or at hourglasslancaster.org. So thank you so much for joining us, Kate.
All right. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.